Max the American, who had transmigrated into this fantasy world, cradled the dew-damp seven-leaf spirit. Lingjie, his knees crashed hard onto the bluestone of the training ground. For this herb he hung on the sheer cliff of the back mountain. For 3 days his palms were torn raw and bloodied. His deep blue eyes held nothing but humble, pleading in the xenophobic Taiji sword sect his foreign skin with blonde hair. And blue eyes was a sin from birth. If he had no backing, it was only a matter of time before the disciples who saw him as a monster played him to death. Senior disciple brother Zhao Feng took the spirit herb. Without interest, his fingertips rubbed the leaves. After he confirmed the medicinal power was intact, a teasing smile tugged at his mouth. His lackeys around him burst into loud laughter. They stared at Max like they were watching a Mon K show. Zhao Feng swung his hand back and slapped Max across the face. The slap carried inner chi. Max had no cultivation at all, and it sent him tumbling 3 meters away. Half his face swelled at once and turned dark. With bruises, a broken tooth flew from his mouth. Zhao Feng roared that the audacious barbarian had dared to steal the precious medicine he had left on the back mountain, and that he had dared to bring it here to claim merit. He shouted as he casually slipped the spirit herb into his storage pouch. Greed and malice filled his eyes. Max ignored the ringing in his ears and the haze in his vision. He struggled up to argue a hoarse roar from his throat as he tried to explain that he had risked his life to pick it. But a law enforcement hall elder happened to stroll over with his hands clasped behind his back. The elder did not even glance at the wounds covering the hands of Max. His gaze paused only for a heartbeat on the jade pendant at the waist of Zhao Feng that marked a great cultivation clan. Then he made his decision at once. The elder said that outsiders were crafty and could not be trusted. He said Zhao Feng was a son of a noble family and would never wrongfully accuse a foreign barbarian. The elder cold words landed like a death sentence. He refused to hear any explanation to curry favor. With the power behind Zhao Feng, he chose the cruelest blow. He called for men, strip off the outer disciple role. B. Confiscate every hidden possession. 30 lashes, demote him to menial servant. At once 2 law enforcement hall. Disciples rushed in like wolves. They tore the robe off Max with brutal hands. His thin pale back was bared. A punishment whip studded with barbs screamed through the air. It cracked down with a sharp sound. Skin split open and flesh burst apart in an instant. Blood splashed across the bluestone. Max clamped his teeth shut and refused to scream, but the agony made his whole body convulse. His consciousness began to blur. When the 30 lashes ended, he was a man drenched in blood. His dignity had been crushed underfoot. Zhao Feng looked down from above at Max, who lay like rotten mud. He wiped his hands in disgust, as if he had just touched something filthy. With a cold laugh, he gave the order, throw him to the back mountain to clean the latrine pits. An odd thing like that only belongs with filth. The menial servant quarter on the back mountain was the most rotten sore beneath the bright face of Taiji sword. Sect the air reeked with a stench that turned the stomach. Flies swarmed over the waist, and their buzzing drilled into the skull. Max dragged his heavy steps through the filth. Each step tore open the 30 whip wounds on his back. Blood seeped through his coarse hemp shirt. It mixed with sweat and stung until his whole body shook. It was deep night, and he still did not dare stop. The overseer had sworn that if he did not finish this section, they would cut his rations tomorrow. Max staggered as weakness tried to drop him. A small black shadow peeked out from the corner of the wall. It was a thin little girl who was also a menial servant, and her name was Xiao Kao. She glanced left and right after she was sure no one watched. She shoved a rough, dry, steamed bun into Max's hand. Then she fled like a startled rabbit and vanished into the dark. Max held the bun, while it still carried a trace of warmth. A faint ripple moved through his sea-blue eyes in a sect that treated him like a pig, and a dog the only kindness came from someone as low as he was. He stuffed the bun into his mouth and devoured it. He swallowed it down along with humiliation and hatred when a little strength returned. Max went to an abandoned garbage heap at the edge of a restricted area. The pile was packed with broken scraps of discarded magic tools, and every day refuse he bent down and reached to move a slab of scrap iron pressed at the bottom. Under it lay a black broken sword covered in heavy rust. It looked ordinary, as if it had been buried for hundreds of years. The instant Max's palm touched the hilt, the wound in his hand split open again. Warm blood dripped onto the blade coated in red rust. A sudden change erupted. The dead-looking broken sword trembled once and let out a low growl, like a starving beast. The dried rust seemed to come alive and latched onto Max. Palm Max tried to fling it away in panic, but the sword was like it had grown into his flesh. A terrifying pull surged from the hilt and drank his blood like a storm. The pain tore a howl from him. His throat rasped with an animal sound. As his blood drained, the rust peeled away and sheets a sword body. Black as ink, emerged a towering murderous aura, burst upward into the night. It was not chi, it was pure killing hunger that made the heart quake. Max felt his body turn cold. Fast, his vision blur. Right. His already ruined body spent its last reserve in the final second before darkness swallowed him. A cold, bloodthirsty sword, intent drilled into his mind. It carved an unerasable blood pact deep into his soul. Max could not hold on, man, and sword crashed into the filth-soaked mud. He lost consciousness completely. Morning sunlight brought Max no warmth at all. He pushed himself up from the filth-soaked mud. The sea blue in his eyes had turned into a dead gray white. The blood-drinker broken sword had not fallen away. It clung tight to his right palm, like an extra limb. With every heartbeat, the blade flashed a strange red light. It felt like it was greedily demanding his lifespan. Young Max did not bother with the festering whip wounds. On his body he carried the sword. He dragged his heavy steps. He walked straight toward the inner sect training ground. The training ground was packed with noise and shouting. Zhao Feng stood flushed with pride as he showed off a shimmering soft armor of golden threads. He patted his chest and bragged that this mysterious gold battle armor could block a full strike from a Foundation establishment. Cultivator, he said his clan had paid a fortune to obtain it as a body protecting treasure. The disciples around him rushed to flatter him. They praised the senior disciple brother for blessed of fate and providence. In the middle of all that laughter and cheers, Max appeared. He reeked of blood and rot. He looked like a ghost that had crawled out of hell. Zhao Feng did not hide the disgust in his eyes. He was about to spit out a few insults at the foreign dog who had been demoted to menial servant. Then he saw that Max did not slow down at all. Max did not even bother to look at Zhao Feng's arrogant face. He simply raised his right arm like a machine. The dried muscles in that arm exploded with a frightening force. There was no flashy sword technique. There was only raw speed and power. A sword light black as ink carved through the air. With a shrieking howl, the savage grin on Zhao Feng's face froze solid. The mysterious gold battle armor he prized so much was as fragile as paper before the black broken sword. A tearing sound ripped through the air. Zhao Feng's entire right arm, holding his longsword, was severed at the root, along with the armor on his shoulder. Blood shot up like a fountain. Only when the severed arm hit the ground with a dull thud did Zhao Feng understand what happened. He clutched the naked stump of his right shoulder and screamed until his voice shattered. He rolled on the ground in unbearable agony. The whole field fell into a deathly silence. Everyone stared in horror. At the blond man drenched in blood, the law enforcement hall elder in charge of order flew down from the high platform in a rage. He shouted that Max was a demonic monster gone mad. He lifted his palm to strike Max dead on the spot under the crushing pressure of a Foundation establishment. Elder Max did not retreat. He stepped forward. A red glare surged in his eyes. He swung a second strike. This strike was not aimed at the Eldar. IT slammed toward the law enforcement main hall behind him that stood as a symbol of sect authority. A thunderous boom shook the ground. Black sword. Chi surged out like an angry dragon. Bursting from the sea, it split the towering 3-story hall cleanly down the middle. The cut was smooth like a mirror. Bricks and tiles collapsed with a roar. Dust rolled up and swallowed the sky. The law enforcement hall elder was hit by the backlash of that terrifying sword. Intent, he spat blood on the spot and was blasted backward. When the dust finally thinned, Max stood with his sword before the ruins. His blonde hair whipped wildly in the wind. He looked like an unchallenged killing star. Terror swept through all of Taiji Sword Sect. No one dared meet those ice-cold blue eyes. The annual grand tournament of Taiji Sword Sect had never been this bloody and suffocating. The stands that used to roar with noise were now silent. Only the dull thud of bodies colliding and the shrill screams from the arena echoed through the empty mountain valley. Max moved like a tireless killing machine. Blood spray had stained his blonde hair, a dark red in those blue-green eyes. There was no human feeling left, only the savage ferocity of a beast. A true inheritance disciple at mid-stage Foundation establishment clenched his teeth and leapt onto the arena. He tried to turn the tide with the sect secret Tai. Prismatic sword shadows filled the air, and no one could tell what was real. Gasps burst from the crowd. Below, Max did not bother to judge truth from illusion. He did not even bother to block. He charged straight into the sword rain, like he was trading his life for theirs. The Blooddrinker broken sword hummed with excitement. Black sword chi tore through the sky, full of light and shadow with brutal force. A crisp crack rang out. The true inheritance disciple high-grade spirit sword was cut in two right after that. A large hand closed around his throat. With ruthless strength, Max lifted the true inheritance disciple into the air like he was hauling a dead dog. The edge of the Blooddrinker broken sword pressed to his cheek and slid slowly across. It left a gash so deep bone showed white beneath the blood. Max did not defeat him right away in front of several thousand people of the sect. He ripped off the storage pouch with rough violence. He dumped every top-grade spirit stones and every healing elixir into his own pocket. When the men tried to struggle, Max applied cold force. He dislocated each joint in the limbs. One by one, the screams made every outer disciple feel a chill crawl up the spine. This was not a duel. It was a public execution and a public robbery. Up on the elder seats, the high leaders' faces were iron dark. Their hands trembled. Yet after the terror of that day, when a single sword split the law enforcement hall, no one dared step out to stop it. Max crushed forward without slowing anyone who faced him. Either ended crippled and maimed, or was stripped clean of everything and left with pride ground into the dirt. He was like an evil wolf that had plunged into a flock of sheep. He drank in every resource he could see with mad hunger. In the end, Max stood on the high platform. As champion at his feet lay shattered weapons and blood-stained robes. He did not care at all. He shoved the condensing essence pill that symbolized the highest sect honor straight into his mouth. By the handful he swallowed them like candy beans. Silence spread like death across the ground. No one dared look directly at that arrogant figure. Max won the tournament. He seized every resource. He built an unshakable reign of terror in Taiji Sword Sect through absolute violence, even though he seemed to feel that every sword swing dimmed the fire of his life. By one more shade, he was already drowned in the pleasure of grinding his old enemies under his feet, and he could not pull himself out. The grand tournament had barely ended when Taiji Sword Sect was hit by a bloody purge. Max did not give anyone time to breathe. He carried the Blooddrinker broken sword that still dripped with blood and stormed straight onto the inner sect peak. Disciples who once followed Zhao Feng to kick him while he was down and mock him were dragged out one by one. Screams rose and fell without pause. Max showed no mercy as he crippled the Dantian of more than 10 disciples and cut off their path of cultivation for good. Senior sisters and junior sisters who once looked down on him now knelt trembling on the ground. Max swept his gaze over them with cold indifference. He pointed at several personal disciple women who had been the most arrogant back then. He ordered them to strip off their brocade and fine robes at once. He ordered them to put on coarse cloth and go to the outer sect to chop wood and haul water. He made them the lowest kind of servants. The proud girls, once surrounded by praise, fell in an instant into prisoners underfoot. The brutal drop made the entire sect hold its breath. No one dared say a single word. Sect Master Li Xuantong finally could not sit still. He rushed over with several grand elders. He tried to use ancestral law and sect rules to suppress Max's violence. Li Xuantong's face was iron blue. He scolded Max for shattering order and decency. He called Max a traitor and a sinner against the sect. Before the words even finished, the rusted iron sword had already shot out like a venomous snake. The icy tip pressed straight against Li Xuantong's nose. A mocking cold smile hung at the corner of Max's mouth. He showed not a trace of reverence. He kicked over the incense burner that symbolized sect authority in front of everyone. In stiff Chinese packed with killing intent, he told Li Xuantong that in this world, the strong rule. He said the bigger fist is the rule right after that. Max declared he would requisition Taiji Main Peak, where the sect master lived. He said the spirit vein there was best suited to nourish his demonic sword. Li Xuantong shook with rage, but when he felt the terrifying sword intent that could take his life in an instant, he still yielded in the end. To cling to life, the sect master could only flee in disgrace with his family. He abandoned the main peak. He handed over the halls that symbolized highest power. From that day on, Taiji Sword Sect existed in name. Only it became Max's private property. He moved into the most luxurious great hall. He seized the spirit stones and pills the sect had hoarded for 100 years. He spent them with reckless waste. Yet whenever the night grew deep and silent, and he sat alone on the vast empty throne, the arrogance in Max's eyes would fade fast. In its place rose an anxiety he could not hold down. He watched the faint lines creeping up at the corners of his eyes. In the mirror, it felt like the price of draining too much lifespan yuan. The thrill of power was like a drug that would not let him stop. Even knowing the road ahead was a bottomless abyss, he could no longer turn back. He could only grip this demonic sword that devoured life. He could only sprint down the road of madness and destruction. A sharp crash rang out as a fine jade cup slipped from Max's hand and shattered. He was not venting anger. His fingers no longer had the strength to hold the cup. A violent fit of coughing doubled him over. In a luxurious tiger skin chair on Taiji Main Peak, thick black blood sprayed from his mouth. Gray-white fragments of his own organs rode in the blood. A rotten stench rolled out with every breath. Max snatched up a bronze mirror beside him in terror. What he saw turned his blood to ice. The hair that once shone like gold was now dry. Like autumn weeds, it fell out in clumps. pale scalp showed through. Wrinkles spread across it like cracked paper. The bright blue eyes that had once been sharp and arrogant were now cloudy, and dull dark pouches sank deep beneath them. Even worse, purple-black corpse spots were spreading fast along his neck. In only a few months, the demonic sword had drained 60 years of his lifespan, Yuan. It was not just his looks. The life fire inside him flickered like a candle in the wind. It could go out at any moment in his mind. A bleak red life countdown seemed to appear. Max calculated in despair and faced a brutal truth with his current body. He only had the lifespan for one last strike. If he drew the sword one more time, he would not need an enemy to kill him. He would turn into a pile of dry bones in an instant. The will to survive crushed every trace of arrogance and dignity. Max rolled and crawled into the storehouse. He found a heavy black iron sword casket. His hands shook as he locked the rusted sword named Blooddrinker. Broken sword. Inside he pasted more than a dozen sealing talismans. On the lid, it looked like he was imprisoning a life-stealing evil ghost. To cling to life, Max changed. Completely, he stopped plundering spirit stones to cultivate slaughter and killing arts. He went mad searching sect ancient texts for life-extending health-nurturing methods. He shut himself inside all day. He did not even dare speak loudly. He feared leaking even a thread of chi. This rapid aging and sudden low profile could not be hidden. When Max appeared again, he could barely walk. His back was bent into a hunch. The brocade robe that once fit him now hung loose and empty on his frame. The dead silence inside the sect turned strange and uneasy. Those disciples he once crushed underfoot had trembled like leaves. Now they stared at the deathly Max, who held no sword. Their fear slowly faded. Malicious testing and suspicion replaced it. The grim reaper who held the demonic sword seemed to have vanished. In his place stood only a dying old man fighting to breathe hatred. Once forced down by blood, began to breed again in the shadows. The autumn wind was thin and bitter, and dead leaves spun across the outer sect square. A killing chill spread through the air and clung to every breath. Max hunched his body, and his fingers, like dried bark, gripped a small green jade bottle. It was the stabilizing origin pill he had bought with the last of what he owned, just to steal a little more time. His blonde hair was withered, pale, and sparse. His face was packed with dark age spots and deep folds. There was no trace left of the sect champion he used to be. He looked like a dying old man counting his final steps. As he tried to hurry away from trouble, a burly figure blocked his path. It was inner disciple Zhao Hu, the cousin of Zhao Fang, whose arm Max had cut off. Zhao Hu stared with venom at the trembling jade bottle in Max's hand. A cruel smile hooked his mouth before Max could react. Zhao Hu snapped his thick arm forward and ripped the bottle away. Max lunged to take it back. A horse scraped out of his throat, but his chi and blood were drained so badly that even lifting his hand was slow and weak. The motion looked ridiculous, like he was moving through deep water. The last trace of fear in Zhao Hu's eyes vanished. He threw his head back and laughed without restraint. He lifted his right leg in heavy beast hide boots and drove his foot into Max's lower belly. The impact landed with a dull thump. Max flew back like a kite. With its string cut, he slammed onto the hard blue stone and spat a mouthful of black blood. The heavy black iron sword casket smashed down on his thin back. It almost crushed his spine, but his first instinct was not to draw a blade. He twisted and wrapped himself around the casket and shielded it with his body. That sight detonated the hatred and greed that had been buried for far too long. The butcher, who once killed on a whim, now took a beating and did not dare swing back. Someone in the crowd screamed that he did not dare draw sword. Someone screamed that the old dog was about to die. Once fear died, the hunger for revenge took its place. Dozens of outer sect disciples surged in at once. Fists and boots fell like a storm. The crack of broken ribs mixed with the heavy sounds of flesh heating stone. Max curled into a tight ball blood, and mud smeared across his face. His eyes were red with burst veins, but he kept them squeezed shut. Dirty soles stamped on his cheek and ground his head into the grit. Pain racked his body, and each breath felt like swallowing blades. He clenched his teeth until they shook. The veins in his hands stood out as he locked both palms around the casket latch. He knew the blood-drinker broken sword was humming inside. He knew it was starving for blood and slaughter. If he pulled it out even a little, he could drop every one of them where they stood. But he did not dare. He only had the lifespan for one last strike. To draw a sword was to die to live. He had to swallow everything, even if his dignity was crushed into mud, even if his bones were broken. He had to endure it like a dead dog. Zhao did not grow bored when Max refused to fight back. The pleasure of trampling a former powerhouse twisted Zhao face. He planted a boot on Max's blood-smeared cheek. He ground the soul hard and crushed that once proud head deep into the mud. Laughter surged in from every side like a tide, and the sound was sharp enough to drive a man insane. Zhao still felt it was not enough. He snapped his arm in a command. Two lackeys hurried over with a wooden bucket that stank with sour, rotted with swill saved for days from the outer sect dining hall. Moldy vegetable scraps floated on top, along with murky grease no one could name. With a splash, the cold thick All swill poured down over Max's head. Max shuddered all over. The cloudy yellow slop streamed through his withered pale hair. It pasted over his sunken eyes. It ran into the torn corner of his mouth. The choking humiliation felt like 10,000 ants gnawing at his heart on his back. The black iron sword casket seemed to sense his sky-high hatred. It rang with a clear sword cry and almost burst its bindings to drink blood. Max's pupils snapped tight. His heart slammed against his ribs, but his hand, like a chicken claw, clamped down on the latch. With desperate force, he could not draw it. To draw it was to die. He roared inside his skull like a man. Atman. For this last scrap of breath, he had to chew his dignity to pieces and swallow it down. Zhao saw Max drenched and still sprawled there like a dead dog. The contempt in his eyes climbed to its peak. He spread his legs wide. He pointed at the gap beneath his crotch. His voice exploded across the square like thunder. If you want to live, you old dog, then crawl through under me, or today I will tear apart your old bones. The whole square fell into instant silence. Every stare locked onto that filthy, ruined body. Max lay on the ground and shook hard. He had lost too much blood, and his vision was already blurred. In front of him, Zhao mud-caked boots looked like two mountains. No one could cross. Every heartbeat of hesitation brought another wave of shrill ridicule. At last, the instinct to survive crushed the last scraps of human pride. Under countless eyes full of disgust, Max began to move that old broken body. His elbows ground on the gravel until skin and flesh were shredded. His face pressed to the cold ground that reeked of urine. Inch by inch, he crawled like a real maggot toward a doorway made of endless shame. When his head passed beneath Zhao, crotch, the roaring laughter almost shattered the heavens. Max kept his eyes sealed shut. 2 lines of cloudy tears mixed with swill slid down his face. The fire that once raged through his heart was now only a final ember beating for the sake of living one more moment. In the instant, Zhao laughed without stopping, and the crowd trampled on the last scrap of Max's dignity. The clear sky darkened with no warning. A pitch-black rift that stretched across 10,000 li opened above Taiji sword sect, like the mouth of a giant beast, thick, chilling, demonic. Chi poured down like spilled ink. The mounting guard array that once blazed with golden light let out a grinding crack the moment it touched that aura. Then it shattered apart in a roaring collapse. The outworld heavenly demons had arrived. Each one was a grotesque monster, 100 jang tall, with many eyes and fleshy wings. Death chi coiled around them, and it was cold enough to freeze a soul at the front. The demon lord strode through. The air every step made space tremble. Its thunder voice exploded inside everyone's spirit weekends. Hand over your living souls as tribute or welcome destruction. Zhao Hu, who had been showing off a moment ago, went limp on the spot. A stream of foul liquid leaked from between his legs and soaked the ground sect master Xuanjizi and several elders Ranjiao. Shared out in panic. Their faces were paper white as they stared at the sky filled with demon shadows. Despair flooded their eyes. They knew the sect had no chance at all against harvesters who had crossed plains to descend here. Xuanji's gaze swept through the chaos at high speed. At last, it locked onto Max curled in the mud, drenched in swill. A vicious and vile thought rose fast inside these so-called righteous leaders. Max was a transmigrator from another world, and his fate did not fit this land. He had once relied on the demonic sword to steal the sect fate and providence. Now his lifespan yuan was nearly spent. He was the perfect scapegoat to sacrifice and soothe the demon wrath. For the sect legacy across 1,000 autumns, we must take this step. Xuanjizi barked low, and his resolve was nauseating. Several elders understood at once. In the same breath, they formed hand seals in perfect sync, like they had drilled it countless times. 4 blazing golden chains appeared from nowhere. They carried a crushing suppression force. They pierced through Max's shoulder blades and through his ankles. In a blink, it was the sect secret immobilizing. Seal it locked the flesh. It sealed the qi. Max was already weak beyond words, and now he was like a broken stone statue that could not move at all. Zhao Hu saw it, and the fear in his eyes twisted into a sick excitement. He scrambled forward on hands and knees. He grabbed one end of the chain with both hands. At the elder's signal, he dragged Max forward like a beast meant for slaughter. He pulled him toward the demon lord, standing before the shattered array. In Max's deep blue eyes, the last spark of hope for humanity went out. He looked at the sect elders who preached virtue every day. He watched the flattery and madness they showed just to live. A thick wave of bitter self-mockery rose in his chest. They hurled him beneath the demon lord's enormous shadow. He became a living tribute for Taiji sword sect to buy a moment of breathing room. Behind him, the black iron sword casket let out one final furious and mournful tremble. Max only bit down hard on his broken lip. He let the icy demonic pressure swallow him whole. Xuanjizi shrieked for Max to draw the sword. Xuanji screamed that Max was an outlander abomination and asked if he would watch the sect fall into ruin. The golden locks that pierced Max's shoulder blades were yanked. Straight blood crawled down from wounds that were already dry. It dripped into the dust. Max's eyes, that used to be clear blue, were now muddy and dull. Inside them was only death-like stillness and mocking scorn. They wanted him to die for the scraps who had ground him into mud. It was a foolish dream. The demon lord, malignant, many-eyed gaze had already fixed on this place. Its huge claw was about to come down. All through the sect, people wailed and fled. Everyone revealed their ugliest panic. In that instant, Max's gaze cut through the chaos and stopped on the corner of a ruin. A small girl in coarse cloth sat fallen in a heap of broken stone. Her face was white with terror as low-tier demons closed in. It was Xiaokao. She was the outer sect menial servant who once slipped him half a cold steamed bun when he was starving and scrubbing. Latrine pits. The demon drool was almost dripping onto her face. Max's dead heart jerked hard. In this filthy world, she was the only light that had ever belonged to him. Max told himself that he could die But she could not die. A savage force he had never touched before erupted from the deepest part of his withered body. It was a last flare bought by burning his soul. With a sharp snap, the 4 golden chains that bound his body shattered piece by piece. Xuanjizi stepped forward to force him, and had no time to react. A black shadow flashed in close. Like a ghost, Max swung his blood-soaked hand in a wide arc. He slapped Xuanjizi across the face with all the fury of his final life. The blow sent the Golden Core Sect master flying 10 zhang away. Half the bones in Xuanjizi's face shattered. Max called him a noisy old dog. Max turned his back and did not hesitate again. He gripped the rust-covered iron sword this time. It was not forced this time. It was a choice. Max offered up everything he had left. The Blooddrinker, broken sword, answered his resolve. A roar like a dragon split heaven and earth. Max's blonde hair turned snow white in an instant. His skin dried and cracked. Like old bark, all the essence of his life was drained in one blink. He did not fall. He poured his last strength into a single strike. At the sea of demons, a half-moon sword, chi black as ink, tore upward. Where it passed, space collapsed, and all things were erased. The outworld heavenly demons did not even have time to scream. They were ground into dust inside the swordlight. The demon lord tried to flee in terror. The sword chi cut it in half at the waist. Its massive body fell like a meteor. Heaven and earth cleared at once. Only the foreign man with golden hair stood there like a weathered statue. He slowly tipped backward and fell. Max felt his body grow light like a feather. His vision dimmed into black. In the last moment, before his mind scattered, he vaguely saw a small figure stumble toward him. He heard her crying and shouting, but he could not make out the words. He could not see her face anymore. But he knew she had lived. Max cracked his ruined lips into the gentlest smile he had worn. Since he transmigrated, it was a smile of relief. Max thought that this was enough. The crisis was not over. The demon lord had taken a crushing blow, but it was still alive. Max Deadwood, like body, slammed into the ground and kicked up a puff of dust. Xiaokao horse, crying, rose sharp and piercing. She threw herself onto the body that seemed to have almost no weight. Her tears mixed with dirt and fell onto Max's cracked, ashen cheek. Far away, Xuanjizi crawled out of the ruins. In a sorry heap, he held the broken bones of half his face. Venom and sick delight filled his eyes. He was about to sneer that the outlander bastard, who did not know the height of heaven, had finally died for good. Then the rusted iron broken sword that still did not leave Max's grip suddenly let out a strange sound. Crack, a crisp splitting sound pressed down over the roar of the battlefield. The thick red rust that had covered the blade for 1,000 years began to peel away in dry flakes like brittle clay. Dazzling saint-light holy radiance burst from the cracks and lit the dim oppressive sky until it turned clear. This was not some greedy demonic weapon that devoured lifespan yuan. It was a guardian holy sword sealed by time and filth. Only the purest sacrifice and the will to protect it with one's life could act as the key. Only that could wash away the grime and reforge a divine edge. A vast golden life source, like an ocean, surged through the hilt and flooded into Max. Dried up meridians. It was a miracle that turned life and death around his shrunken hollow flesh, swelled and healed at a visible speed. A healthy glow like polished jade returned to his skin. His long hair that had turned pale and withered from burning life was washed in holy radiance and shifted strand by strand back to gold. In the end, it became a blazing river of molten gold hair whipping wild. Inside a storm of chi, Max snapped his eyes open. His once cloudy blue pupils became burning golden vertical pupils. Divinity stood in them, cold and lofty with no trace of mortal smoke. His body did not move yet. He rose and floated into the empty air. One hand closed around the blade that had fully revealed its true form. a platinum saint sword. He looked like a sun god awakened from an ancient myth, gazing down at the beings below, like Gans the demon lord trying to use demonic chi to rebuild its shattered body, screamed with unbearable shrillness. Its many eyes filled with absolute terror. It felt a total suppression from the level of rules. It felt a natural enemy aura named Purification. It went mad trying to rip space open, and Fleamax only turned his wrist with a blank face and casually swung one sword at the empty air. There was no earth-shaking explosion, only a golden ripple spreading like a wave on water. The light pattern swept across the sky. The rolling demonic chi melted in an instant like snow meeting hot soup. The demon lord's huge vicious body touched the golden light and vanished without a sound. Along with it, the begging it never managed to speak. Also vanished everything that proved it had ever existed in this world, was wiped away completely. The demon lord's last ashes dissolved in the golden radiance, until nothing remained. The shattered sky, slowly sealed shut under the lingering might of the holy sword. Max floated in silence, high above the ruins. His blazing river of molten gold hair stirred in the breeze. His blue eyes were deep as the sea. No trace remained of the meek menial who once kept his head bowed. Xiao knelt on the ground and stared up at that godlike back. The tremble of surviving faded from her limbs. In its place rose a fever that felt like faith among the ruins. Xuanji and the surviving elders trade. A single look. The greed and malice in their eyes vanished in the same breath. It was replaced by desperate flattery. They crawled across the scorched earth. They pressed their foreheads down at Max's feet. Their voices were hoarse, but they forced them loud. They shouted that the supreme elder power covered the world. Xuanjizi did not even care about the shattered bones of his face. He spoke fast and promised to rebuild Max's body. In gold, he promised to rename Taiji Sword Sect into Holy Sword Sect. He promised generations of worship for Max's divine throne. These were the same leaders who called Max an abomination and drove him to death. Now, they performed loyalty with shameless faces just to survive. The end. Max looked down at them without expression. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a calm that had seen through cause and effect. He did not lift the sword to slaughter them. He only drew back the holy light that circled his body. When the guardian halo withdrew, the backlash of karma burst out at once. The holy aura had been crushing it into silence. These elders had secretly cultivated evil methods to steal more years. They had also burned away their own fortune by forcing a saint to the brink. Now the price came due in a heartbeat. Their faces aged before the eye, their dentition shattered inch by inch. Their cultivation collapsed into nothing. Even their bones began to rot. In moments they became mortals who could barely stand. Max ignored the wailing and the begging behind him. He drifted down from the sky. He reached out and gently took Xiao Cao's hand. The platinum saint sword rested on his back in flowing light. He walked straight toward the end of the sea of clouds. His steps were steady and absolute, as if every grudge and every debt on this land no longer touched him. That lone powerful figure slowly faded into the last light of the sun. Only a legend remained, an eternal tale of a blonde-haired sword god. He belonged to no sect ever again. He became the last watchman of this world. At the barren and boundless edge of creation, he left an undying mark of protection for all beings.